Long before he was the handsome antihero in multiple blockbuster movies, he was a cackling supervillain in a whole bunch of old comics. And before that, of course, he was an actual god in mythology. Here's the untold truth of Marvel's Loki. Like Thor and Odin, Loki originated in Norse mythology, where they were all major pre-Christian deities of the Scandinavian people. Whereas most Norse gods were big, burly guys with long beards, Loki was always portrayed as lithe, androgynous, and sneaky. Although he was the child of frost giants, he was associated with fire and the color red. Like fire, he could not be easily contained and never kept to just one shape. He and Odin, king of the gods, were blood brothers, which made him basically a member of the family no matter how much trouble he caused. And as the god of mischief, he caused no end of trouble. He also produced monstrous children who had their own roles to play in the mythology. He was the father of Hel, the half-withered goddess of the underworld, and of Fenrir, the giant wolf who bit the hand off of the god Tyr. Having once taken the form of a mare, he was the mother of Odin's eight-legged horse, Sleipnir. As a prank, Loki once cut all of the hair off of Thor's wife, Sif. When he got in trouble for it, he made amends by giving Sif new hair spun of gold and also commissioning the dwarves to forge Thor's famous hammer, Mjolnir. When Loki proved too troublesome, Odin bound him under the earth, where a serpent constantly drips poison on his face. He'll be released with the coming of Ragnarok, the Norse apocalypse, in which all the gods and monsters will fight to the death. Loki's first appearance in Marvel Comics was in Journey into Mystery number 85, published in 1962. This version was created by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, who had introduced Thor only 2 issues earlier. Once Thor had become a superhero, it only made sense to bring in Loki as a supervillain. Stan Lee freely drew what he wanted from the Norse myths, while Kirby created a visual language for Marvel's Asgard, one that made these super gods look unlike any Norse people who'd ever lived, while retaining some basic iconography. The new Loki was still slimmer than Thor and Odin, but now he had black hair and dressed in green and gold. Whereas Thor's helmet had wings, Loki's had large horns. Instead of Odin's blood brother, Marvel Loki was his adopted son, making him Thor's brother, and thus a more equal adversary. He relied less on shape-shifting than his mythical counterpart, but made up for it with impressive skills at sorcery. Loki became Thor's recurring arch-enemy, and perhaps even more importantly, he was the very first villain who faced the Avengers. In fact, he accidentally brought the team together. Attempting to mess with Thor from a distance while imprisoned in Asgard in Avengers number 1, Loki manipulated the Hulk to make people think he was on a rampage. That got not only Thor involved, but also Iron Man, Ant-Man, and the Wasp. When the 4 heroes realized Loki was the true culprit, they teamed up with the Hulk to battle Loki. Afterwards, they decided to stay together as a team, using their combined powers to protect the world from threats too big for just one hero.
Avengers! Assemble.
Supervillain or not, Loki was still Thor's brother. That made their relationship much more complex than other heroes and their arch-enemies. With Loki, there's some part of him that loves Thor and knows Thor loves him back, just as they both love their father, Odin. On top of that, as more of a mischievous sorcerer than an evil world conqueror, Loki was just too interesting to stay entirely a villain forever. So in time, there were stories where he teamed up with Thor to face greater threats. The most notable example was in the 1980s, during the acclaimed Thor run by writer-artist Walt Simonson. In the culmination of a long foreshadowed plot, the fire giant Surtur was attacking Asgard with an army of the dead and threatening all the realms beyond. Odin and his 2 sons stormed into battle together, each with a battle cry, and that revealed their priorities in resisting Surtur. During the Siege crossover, Loki sacrificed himself and died. He was then reincarnated as an adolescent boy. Far more pure of heart than his older counterpart, Kid Loki had his own series of adventures in a new volume of Journey into Mystery. At the end of that story, Kid Loki's body was taken over by a more amoral version of the character from his previous incarnation, although he retained the Kid Loki identity. Kid Loki went on to found a new version of the Young Avengers, featuring the Kate Bishop version of Hawkeye, as well as Wiccan, Hulking, Marvel Boy, and America Chavez. Over the course of that series, the other young heroes gradually came to trust this young god of mischief, even as Loki himself struggled with whether or not he was worthy of that trust. Late in Young Avengers, Kid Loki is magically aged up to around college age. He remained younger than he'd previously been, while becoming enough of an adult to interact with Thor and other adult characters without being treated like a child. After the end of Young Avengers, Loki got his own comic titled Loki, Agent of Asgard. The idea behind the title was that Loki, no longer villainous but still amoral, was perfectly suited to take on secret and sometimes ethically suspect missions for the rulers of Asgard, like a one-god Black Ops team. It was a perfect premise for the character and led to some well-loved stories. Meanwhile, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was making Loki more popular than he'd ever been, with tons of people who'd never read a Marvel comic becoming big fans of the character. A huge part of that popularity has to be attributed to the work of Tom Hiddleston, the handsome English actor who was cast in the role. Most of Hiddleston's previous acting work was on British television, and he was largely unknown in the United States. That changed with the release of Thor in 2011, in which Hiddleston's Loki was the primary antagonist. At the beginning of the movie, Loki is presented as an ally to his brother Thor, accompanying the Thunder God and his friends on an ill-fated trip to Jotunheim, home of the Frost Giants. Things soon break down, however, when Thor is exiled to Earth and Loki learns he's actually of the Frost Giant race himself. As Odin enters a mystical slumber, Loki plots to take over Asgard. To do that, he has to remove Thor from the line of succession, even if it means killing him. Although he was the villain of the piece, fans enjoyed his complicated morality as much as his handsome face. Just as Loki was responsible for the founding of the original Avengers in the comics, so too was Hiddleston's version in 2012's The Avengers. In this version, Loki is wielding a mind-controlling staff and is working in tandem with an alien race in an attempt to conquer the Earth. To stop him, S.H.I.E.L.D. brings together Thor, Iron Man, Captain America, the Hulk, Black Widow, and Hawkeye. Once again, Loki's actions lead to the formation of Earth's greatest super team, to his regret.
You are all of you beneath me. I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by that.
2013's Thor: The Dark World finds Loki imprisoned in Asgard following the events of the Avengers. When dark elves invade and kill Frigga, mother of Thor and adoptive mother of Loki, Thor releases Loki to help defeat the elves. While this sequel is frequently criticized, audiences did get something they'd been wanting: a less evil Loki. In fact, that's what Tom Hiddleston wanted as well. In a 2013 interview with Total Film magazine, Hiddleston explained, "When I met Alan Taylor, director of Dark World, he asked me how I thought I could do Loki again without repeating myself, and I remembered talking with Kevin Feige when we were on the Avengers promotional tour. I said, okay, you've seen Thor and Loki be antagonistic for 2 films now. It would be amazing to see them fight side by side. Loki's duplicity inevitably emerges at the film's end, of course. The god of mischief appears to die heroically in battle with the Dark Elves, but he later reveals himself as alive and masquerading as Odin. By taking his father's form, Loki has achieved his ambition to rule Asgard." After appearing in Marvel movies for 3 years in a row, Loki had a 4-year break before turning back up in 2017's Thor: Ragnarok. Upon returning to Asgard, Thor finds his brother still impersonating Odin. The two go in search of the real Odin, who has returned to Norway, the land where he once was worshipped to die. Upon his death, the death goddess Hela is freed from an ancient imprisonment. She effortlessly destroys Thor's hammer and then sends Thor and Loki careening into endless space. Loki finds himself on the planet Sakaar and ingratiates himself to its ruler, the hedonistic Grandmaster. Thor soon arrives as well and is forced to fight as a slave in the gladiatorial arena, where his first opponent is the Hulk. Soon, Thor and Loki team up with Bruce Banner and a long-lost Asgardian Valkyrie to escape Sakaar and return to Asgard to face Hela. In Ragnarok, Loki's still not exactly trustworthy, but he's not a villain at all anymore, and ultimately proves himself a worthy ally to his brother as the two escape the destruction of Asgard with most of the population in a huge ship.
I wouldn't worry, brother. I feel like everything's gonna work out fine.
This new status quo, however, would be sadly short-lived. Avengers: Infinity War, released in 2018, is the climax of the Marvel meta-story that had been building since the first movie. It's fitting, therefore, that it begins with Thanos invading the Asgardian ship and killing Loki. The original Avengers villain dies a hero at the hands of the ultimate villain, who was secretly using Loki during the invasion of Earth in the Avengers. At this point, Thanos is gathering the Infinity Stones as part of his mission to wipe out half of all life in the universe, and none of the Asgardians are powerful enough to stop him from gaining the Tesseract, the Infinity Stone that was at the center of that plot in Avengers. Hiddleston's Loki had evolved so far by this point that it was sad for basically everyone, not just the Loki mega fans, to see him strangled to death by Thanos. He came so close to being a hero in his own right, and maybe there at the end he was one. When he turned up next, however, it was as the villain he'd once been. Thanos wins at the end of Infinity War, so in 2019's Avengers Endgame, the surviving Avengers have to go back in time to recover the Infinity Stones from various points in history, before they were acquired by Thanos. As they explained before doing so, each time they change the past, their actions create an alternate timeline where things went differently. One of their time travel destinations is the aftermath of the invasion in the first Avengers, when Loki had been defeated and taken into custody. During the confusion, Loki is able to get his hands on the Tesseract once more and use it to escape to parts unknown. What this means, of course, is that there's a Loki out there in the Marvel multiverse again, despite his death at Thanos' hand in the main timeline. But what it also means is that the Loki who now exists is one who'd never fought alongside Thor against the Dark Elves or helped save the other Asgardians from Hela. This Loki comes directly from a time when he was very much a villain. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite comic book heroes and villains are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.